No one likes a playground bully. You pushed me, I'll shove you back. But tit-for-tat scraps take on a whole new meaning when it's two of the biggest countries in the world. What are the global ramifications of the trade dispute between the US and China? You're watching Roundtable with me, David Foster. So who is going to blink first? China and the US having one of the world's biggest trading relationships. So who stands to lose if it becomes a full-blown trade war? Well, quite possibly you, me, indeed anybody who has money to spend.
We've developed a great relationship with China, other than the fact that they've been killing us on trade for the last long period of time. Killing us, absolutely killing the United States on trade.
President Donald Trump on the attack in an attempt to strengthen the US economy. China is just one trading partner he has in his sights, but its leaders have refused to bow down. Has Trump met his match? Or will his tariffs trigger a global trade war? The president's confrontational approach to international commerce has set the world on edge. He tweeted that trade wars are good and easy to win. Trump's determined to protect his country's industry. America has accused China of appropriating intellectual property, such as patents and designs of American companies, which China denies.
When I was in China, I said, listen, President Xi, I have a lot of respect for President Xi. I said, I don't blame you. If you're able to get away with making almost $500 billion a year off of our country, how can I blame you?
But to show it's serious, the US administration has increased tariff rates by 15 to 25%. First solar panels and washing machines, then steel and aluminium. China retaliated with tariffs on more than 200 products. Trump hit back with tariffs worth $50 billion on thousands of products, and he's considering imposing another $100 billion. No country is safe, with Trump threatening the European Union deal and the agreement with Canada and Mexico.
And if we don't make a deal, I'll terminate NAFTA.
Donald Trump's actions are causing concern about the future of the global economy.
It will be a lose-lose-lose. China, United States, and the world economy. Together, these two countries make nearly 40% of global GDP.
History shows trade wars are not good for business. When the Smoot-Hawley Act was passed by the US Congress in 1930, the goal was to protect American farmers and businesses. Instead, it prolonged the Great Depression. When President George W. Bush raised steel tariffs in 2002, US GDP declined by $30 million and caused 200,000 job losses. But American officials are playing down the talk of a trade war. Will America's hardball tactics succeed in gaining more leverage for future negotiations? Or is this a fight over world hegemony? Previous trade wars have often backfired, and America's decisions will reverberate around the global economy.
Please say that joining us from Limassol in Cyprus, we have Jameel Ahmad, the Global Head of Currency Strategy and Market Research at foreign exchange broker ForexTime. With me at the round table, we have Yueh, broadcaster and author of The Great Economists. Also here, Torrens, China specialist at Control Risks, a global risk consultancy firm, and Charlie Wolf, US political analyst. Great to have you all here. Linda, let me start with you first of all. Who's going to get hurt in this, do you think?
We all are. I think the outcome of a trade war is, or a looming trade war, is that when tariffs get imposed, that's a tax. So think of a 25% increase in prices for something which used to, well, anything that has a component made in China or the United States, and that's a lot of stuff because the two biggest economies in the world are also the two biggest traders. Of course, 25% sounds like a lot. Oftentimes, it's going to be imposed on products, intermediate bits of products. So I don't think we ought to view it as sort of a potentially several billion-dollar hit unless it escalates, which of course is always possible.
You see, this is what I'm wondering, is if it is going to hurt everybody. Charlie, what's the president got in mind?
Well, I don't think this is going to be your average sort of protectionism. And also, from what I'm hearing, the amount of hurt isn't that great. I think you're talking about $700 on a car. You know, when you're talking about $35,000 to buy a car in the States, $700 is not that much. On a six-pack of beer, which is obviously very important to Americans, you're talking pennies. I think there's something more at hand here, and I think this is some sort of a negotiation ploy, knowing how the president works. So this hopefully won't last that long, and it won't be that intense. I don't think this is going to be that sort of a tit-for-tat buildup of one product versus another.
Chris, President Trump, I should say, in his original tweet said, when we're down 100 billion with a certain country and they get cute, don't trade anymore, we win big, it's easy. In the reporter package, it was 500 billion a year that he quoted there. And yet, some of the remarks when he sent the tweet out were, stop pretending you understand business, go play golf or something. Does he get it?
I'm not sure if he does. I mean, I take issue with what Charlie said just then about the impact on the US economy. I think, tariffs on soybeans are going to hurt US farmers, precisely the people he's looking to protect. I think he plays a much more tactical game than the Chinese. Chinese are thinking very long term. We've got a Made in China 2025 strategy. Trump is looking to October, to the midterm elections. He's looking to be tough. And in as much as he has a grand strategy, it is to get tough on China.
So just oratory? Just loudspeaker diplomacy at the moment.
Well, he needs some wins. In terms of executive actions, he's not markedly ahead of Bush or Obama at this stage, and he needs to show that he can deliver some tangible.
Charlie, do jump in, then we'll go to Jameel.
I just wanted to say, if you go back to the campaign, even though it was the wall that was the big topic, in actual fact, I think, just from my own personal watching, he was speaking more about China and trade. I don't know how many times I heard him say, China and currency manipulation, China and stealing intellectual property rights, but currency manipulation was over and over and over again. So this is not, unknown to us that he was going to do this.
Absolutely, and we'll come back to this in just a moment, if we may. But Jameel, let me ask you this first of all. When things are in the balance, when risks are put out there by politicians or businessmen, the markets tend to react if it's serious. Have you seen that sort of thing happening yet?
Now, this is an interesting question, because if you look at one asset class, the stock markets, they're behaving very sensitively to these developments. However, on the currency markets, in terms of the currency movements, there's been very muted volatility. So what this suggests to me is that investors are not quite thinking yet what this might mean for the macro and the economic outlook, in particular for central bank decisions. However, if you look at the stock market volatility, it's possible that corporations are thinking about it. But everybody does think that this is a negotiation period and that there won't be a trade war. So perhaps this is why the markets are not behaving in tandem with each other.
So how would we know that the trade war had started?
For me, it would be a lot more volatility on the currency markets, particularly in global stocks. At the moment, what we've seen from global stock markets is a lot of erratic behavior, where they're up, then they're down, and then they're switching again. In terms of the currency markets, we'd expect a lot of big moves in the US dollar, gold, Japanese yen. Even those viewers who might appear isolated from where the trade war might potentially happen, you will see volatility. Emerging market currencies. This is an example of this. There'll be less risk from investors, which means there'll be less appeal in terms of emerging market currencies as well.
Okay, so that's what you look if you're looking at the graphs and the screens, but what if you're actually looking to see real practical evidence of a trade war starting? Linda, what would you be keeping your eyes open for?
Well, two things. One is I agree that tariffs are really part of the, I guess they're negotiating. I mean, the reports are they are negotiating behind the scenes between the Chinese and the Americans to try and resolve this. But tariffs are pretty easily reversible, and that's why I don't think you're getting a massive market reaction. Of course, we have to remember the dollar is the global reserve currency, and so it has a very unusual movement anyways whenever you have a turmoil in global market. So I would look for two other things. One is whether or not there's an escalation that hits investment. So the Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, has been instructed by the president to look at whether Chinese investment into the United States will be restricted. And if the Chinese continue with this pretty much proportionate tit-for-tat return, then it's possible that China restricts, I should say, even further American investment into China. So I would say that would be an escalation. Where I would get really worried is if the WTO, which China has taken the United States to over these tariffs as violating international trade rules.
And the WTO seems to be siding to some extent more with the US than with China, am I right?
Well, the World Trade Organization is slightly tricky. The steel and aluminium tariffs are justified on national security, and so that doesn't give a great role to the WTO. But if in 60 days China has brought this action, and say the WTO rules against the United States, President Trump, during his press conference, when he announced this trade tension, this set of tariffs, he complained the WTO is ineffectual in creating a level playing field in terms of trading with China. He has in the past threatened to pull out of the WTO. If the U.S. were to pull out of the global trading system, the rules-based system, I would say that would be a serious escalation. We would definitely be in a trade war.
Well, one of you two, I mean, it was mentioned just now that this isn't something new. We've been hearing about dumping steel. We've been hearing about currency manipulation by China. My limited memory of these things going back at least 15 years.
Yeah,
so why
2003, I think.
Why is nothing happening?
Yeah.
Well, has nothing happened till now?
Well, I mean, from my perspective, again, it comes back to this tactical behavior by President Trump, and I think what Linda's saying around WTO and the threat against WTO is key. I mean, if we throw the WTO out of the window and the US refuses to play by those rules, then we lose a platform for global trade and global negotiations, and that's worrying because the example set by the US and perhaps by China as well, if she does continue to retaliate with these tariffs, is not a great example for other countries. So we'll see other economies becoming more protectionist as well.
So that is more evidence, is it perhaps, Charlie, that Trump is doing this just for bullhorn politics, that he's saying something that isn't going to come to anything when the same situation has been around for years? I'm
not sure. I think this is tactical. This is, you know, and what I find kind of hard to grasp is the way that we have two things we're putting tariffs on, essentially. I mean, I know there's other things, and there's this big stink all around the world. But at the same time, you look at what the European Union is doing. You know, Trump is claiming at least national security. The European Union is putting tariffs on Levi jeans and motorcycles, on Harley Davidsons, and I don't know unless we're developing some sort of an IBCM missile out of dungarees, you know. So, you know, when I listen to the EU or some of the other countries make a big stink about this, I know that they're kind of being tactical in their own ways as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but jump in. Yeah.
I think as I recall, the EU have a temporary reprieve, don't they, now from the steel and aluminium tariffs until May, and what they did was the WTO allows for retaliatory tariffs. In other words, if you have been slapped with a tariff that is not justified under WTO rules, then you're allowed to respond by retaliating and choosing the sectors that essentially you think will inflict the most political harm. And that's what the EU has done. So Levi jeans, Harley Davidson motorcycles, whiskeys, these are in the home districts of Congress, members of Congress, who can then put pressure on the Trump administration. And I think there were reports by some members of Congress, they were even considering restraining President Trump's powers over trade. Remember, trade power is within the executive branch, but it's a delegated power from the legislative branch.
This is
I don't
something
think that will happen.
Want to look at in a little while, which is, you know, free trade as a principle of Americanism, or is it protectionism? Where does Congress stand with the elections coming up, etc., etc. But what I'd like to talk about now is China's trade policy. And I found an article today, just purely by chance coming into the program, about the Democratic Republic of Congo becoming a battleground, perhaps, for China and West trade relations, because there you can mine cobalt, which is desperately needed, not just in smartphones, but as we move towards electric vehicles, it's going to be more and more needed. And both China and the West are desperate to get their hands on this product. Are we seeing an aggressive move by China and or the United States to try and take control over something that will be essential to the future of world economy, such as the electric vehicle?
I mean, China, you know, the reason that China started going abroad, and we now have this Belt and Road Initiative, it's been called many things and had many different incarnations over the last 15, 20 years, but the reason it went abroad was to get the stuff, the fuel, the materials it needs to keep fueling its economy. It also went abroad to get IP, to get know-how, and to try and find new markets. But that first priority is the biggest one. And I think it's part, you know, the backdrop is a gradual shift as the West, but really the US, exits stage left, and China assumes a more central position as a global superpower. And Africa is the battleground, as it were, or the market ground. China is, as we've seen, has been pushing into sub-Saharan Africa for many years. It's looking at DRC. I think it's already invested in Democratic Republic of Congo and a number of other countries. And at the same time, we have heard a lot of talk about the US pulling back from Africa and from the Middle East. So I think this is part of a bigger picture and a bigger trend.
Is it the Jameel, this is for you, is it part of the Chinese involvement that has led to the, let's say, the price of cobalt quadrupling in just a couple of years?
Quite possibly. I visit China a lot over the past couple of years. Definitely have noticed this shift from the people of China embracing globalization a lot more and shown a great deal of interest in what's going on in the global economy. And the other side, when I'm traveling to places like Africa, other countries in Asia, and even the Middle East, there's a lot of interest behind what China's involvement is in these business deals. One Belt, One Road initiative is just one example of this. And yet, also received questions on what protectionist policies from the United States mean to our economies on the ground, whether this is South Africa or Malaysia or somewhere in the Middle East. So there definitely is a bigger picture at play here where China is trying to take a more dominant role in the global economy and proven itself as a global economic superpower.
Linda, what do you think about the fact that the United States is, well, some Republicans are saying they want free trade agreements. They want to set up some sort of global deal with China, and that's part of the negotiations we're talking about. And yet America has a history, if you like, of protectionism, the exact opposite of free trade. So what are we seeing here? The heart and soul of original America, protectionism, or something different?
I think countries become protectionist over periods of their economic development. So when America was beginning to industrialize, it was quite protectionist. It's called the infant industry argument, where you feel you can't compete at the time against the British. So as China was industrializing, it's industrialized now, it was also very protectionist during this period. The United States is now deindustrializing, and so it also has something to gain from being more protectionist. But I actually think opening up China's markets would be something that they've been talking about since President Trump came into office. That's a much better way of reducing your trade deficit. You can either make imports more expensive and reduce imports, or you can sell more exports. And what is absolutely clear is that global trade in the area the United States is best at, services, is very much restricted. So the WTO global trade agreements only cover manufactured goods for the most part. And that means that if there was a bilateral free trade agreement that opened up especially professional services, financial services, then the United States, which runs a trade surplus in services overall, but a deficit in manufactured goods, would do better on a multilateral basis anyways, because once I think, as you know, as we've been talking about, once these two countries act, others are likely to follow if they were to open up the services. So, okay,
so we're stripping it away, and we're seeing negotiation tactics going on, perhaps to lead to sort of more open trade. Is that's the way that China perhaps sees it? Do you think China believes that the United States sees it the same way?
I'm not sure that they've really worked out Trump yet, to be honest. I think they were overjoyed at first and then have become a lot more concerned about his ability to disarm them. And I think the North Korean move, as it were, is actually...
When you say disarm, in what sense?
Diplomatically, perhaps,
good.
From a sort of engagement perspective. But actually, Trump may have achieved something quite significant there. Something that hasn't been achieved for many years in terms of trying to de-escalate.
So he's inscrutable to a race of people that have, over the years, been described as inscrutable. You couldn't read the Chinese, they can't read Donald Trump.
I think China is pushing itself onto the global stage, and it has to. It's realised that it needs more high-profile political leaders. It needs to behave in a more globally recognised way, and the opportunity is there because the first year of this US administration has been unpredictable, and there has perhaps been at times an absence of
only a year?
Global
Goodness
leadership.
gracious, it seems so much longer.
But I'd agree with Linda about opening up the markets, and China would understand that, and the US has had some success there. So focus on the positives rather than just trying to slam door the...
Well, you tell Charlie, in your job as somebody who promotes trade from the US and other countries into China and from China outside, how successful and how easy that is at the moment for Chinese businesses. And then I'll get your response, Charlie.
Okay, and that's a fair point. It has become more difficult because the investment environment, the regulatory environment has toughened up. 15, 20 years ago, there were not many stringently enforced regulations. And, you know, an argument could be made for multinationals doing very well and being able to make huge profits at a time when the real priority was just attracting FDI. Now I think what Xi Jinping is...
Foreign direct investment.
Direct investment, sorry.
Foreign money.
Yeah, foreign money coming in. And what Xi Jinping is trying to do now is to tighten up and to improve the regulatory environment. Many companies feel that it's gone too far, and there are probably cases where foreign companies feel they've been targeted over domestic ones. But it is an attempt to try to just make the rules a bit tougher.
And China, is this, you can respond to this of course, but is this because Trump sees himself representing the blue-collar worker rather than the elite?
Yeah.
And in doing so, he's sort of helping his voter base. Yes.
I'm trying to remember, how did that slogan go that I think Mnuchin came up with? If you make steel, you're doing better. If you use steel, you're doing worse. I can't remember how. I remember. I get it backwards now. But again, he does see himself as the hero of the blue collar, and the blue collar sees him the same way. I don't know if it's relevant as an aside, but Roseanne Barr, of course, has just brought back her program Roseanne about this blue collar family living in middle America, real blue collar people, and they're backing Trump, the Connor family, and I believe Roseanne Barr, who I don't know, never struck me as a Republican, but yeah, she's backing Donald Trump. So it's not something you generally hear out of Hollywood or the TV comedians.
So can I try and sum up at this particular point? We're seeing an awful lot of bluster, not necessarily anything that's going to be long-term destructive or constructive. That we're looking at a man and a party that want to do well come the November elections in the United States. And we could all suffer as a result, but there'll be no trade war?
I wouldn't rule out a trade war because I think it's very possible this escalates. And in many ways, if Trump is seen as being tough on China, which Charlie's right, he spent a lot of the campaign actually talking about China and trade. And one of his first acts, his first day in office, he pulled the United States out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership that's now being formed by 11 other countries without the United States. I think it took some people by surprise because trade is not generally the first thing on a president's agenda. There's a lot of things that go on an agenda. And yet, so I think that if he doesn't make sufficient leeway with China, because remember, they've started this parallel quiet set of negotiations, but it's actually been going on since President Xi Jinping visited Mar-a-Lago. So we're talking really about a very long time where nothing much has happened. And there's just the possibility that this escalation brings about greater market opening. But there's also a possibility this escalation is what it sounds like, more greater escalation, especially if it does serve a political purpose going into November. It's only April.
This is what we hear all the time. It could be this, it could be that, it could be this,
well,
it could
I think with President Trump in particular.
Based on Clausewitz, I guess trade is war by other means. Well, I mean, didn't he say that this is a war and a war that can be won?
Jameel, you're sitting there and obviously observing this. Some might suggest as somebody who's sort of circling above the bodies on the ground. But is it exciting or dangerous?
guess it's a little bit of both. There's certainly a very unpredictable nature to White House policies, as we have come to expect from the Trump administration since he entered power. Look, there's exciting times in the markets because there's a lot of volatility, but at the same time, you need to know your risk. And investing takes good risk management, and it takes a high degree of investor education. So this isn't something that you necessarily just jump into. But just to swing back to one of the previous...
You're going to have to make it very quick, I'm afraid.
Trump does have an election coming up quite soon, the midterms, and he's also on a campaign that you follow his social media feeds to say that he's going to do a better job than his predecessors. So any trade deal he gets from China at this point that he can spin that he's done better than those in the power in the past will make him look like a winner and appease to his supporters.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jameel. Thank you to everybody around the table, around the round table. And if you want to leave your comments about what you've seen on this programme, not just this one, but many others, because you'll find loads of them there on YouTube. Just go to the Roundtable YouTube page. Obviously, watch the programme. We'd like that very much indeed, and leave your thoughts. We really don't mind what you say, as long as you say something. So we've been talking about trade wars. No trade war at the moment. A possibility, but certainly at the moment we are seeing two of the major economies in the world trading some kind of blows. I'm David Foster. You've been watching Roundtable. Hope to have your company next time from me and my guests. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.